Saturn retrograde is here. On July 26th, Saturn stands still at 14 degrees of Aries and starts walking backward, and it keeps backing up until December 10th. That is Saturn retrograde 2026, and one fact about it is missing from almost every video riding this wave. It is a rerun. Saturn has not run a complete retrograde in Aries since 1997. And the degree where it stops this December, just under 8 of Aries, sits within half a degree of the spot where it stood still and turned around in July of 1996. If you were alive that year, you have already lived a version of this season. Stay with me, and I will show you where the rerun plays out in your chart, sign by sign. The personal version, up front. This retrograde sweeps one narrow corridor of sky, from 14 degrees of Aries back to 8, 3 times over. One house of your chart holds those degrees, and that house is where the season does its work. If you have anything from roughly 6 to 16 degrees of Aries, Libra, Cancer, or Capricorn, a planet, the moon, your ascendant, Saturn, is dealing with it directly. Later, I walk all 12 signs one at a time, so you can jump to yours by chapter. 2 things first, what Saturn is doing when it backs up, and what the last Aries rerun looked like on the ground. A retrograde is not the sky malfunctioning, and it is not a penalty aimed at you. Saturn never truly reverses. Earth overtakes it on the inside lane, and the slower planet seems to slide back against the stars the way a slower car slides back in your window. What matters for your chart is the pattern that motion creates. On its first pass through those degrees this spring, Saturn drafted something in that part of your life. A commitment, a structure, a limit, a plan. The retrograde is the review pass. The same planet rewalks the same ground, slower, and tests whether what got built there holds. From December, it walks the corridor a 3rd time and finalizes. Draft, review, final. Anyone who ships real work knows the middle pass is where the quality comes from. The calendar. Saturn stops at 14 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries on July 26th. Through August, September, and October, it backs down through the middle of the sign at a glacial pace, about 1.5 degrees a month. On the night of December 10th, it stands still at just under 8 degrees of Aries and turns forward. By the middle of March 2027, it has recrossed everything it reviewed and breaks new ground. One detail sets this year apart. The whole retrograde happens inside Aries. Last year, Saturn slid backward over the border into Pisces mid-retrograde, back into old sky. This time, there is no retreat. The full review runs in the sign of first moves, independence, and starting again. Now the history, because a 29-year cycle means this review has run before, on the record. Saturn last toured Aries from 1996 to 1999. The first retrograde of that tour began in July of 96 at 7 degrees of Aries, and that number should sound familiar. This December, Saturn turns direct within half a degree of the same spot. The following year came the second sweep, August to December of 97, higher up the sign. The tour before that lands in 1967, and that summer's retrograde swept nearly the identical corridor this one covers. 12 degrees of Aries back to 5. So you hold dated evidence. What were you rebuilding in the back half of 1996? Or a generation earlier, in the autumn of 67? Different decade, same degrees, same house of your chart, same question. Watch it on a real chart. Maya, the example chart on this channel, born March 14, 1992, has 9 degrees of Aries rising and Mercury at 10 degrees of Aries. Both sit inside the corridor. Saturn crossed her ascendant for the first time in early May, then her Mercury about 2 weeks later. That was the draft. On the way back, it recrosses Mercury in mid-October and her ascendant at the turn of November. For her, the review reads as a rework of how she shows up and how she speaks, the first house and the planet of her voice. Then, Saturn parks in December, barely more than a degree beneath her ascendant, turns and makes the final pass in late January and early February. 3 dated visits to the same 2 points. Your chart runs its own version wherever 8 to 15 degrees of cardinal sign falls. Aries, this lands in your first house, which is to say, in you. Identity, body, direction, the name on the door. Since spring, you have been redeciding how you run your own life, and this stretch pressure tests the result. Commitments about who you are and who you are done being. The ones with structure under them hold. The ones made for an audience tend to buckle, and the buckling is information. By December, you know which was which. Taurus, 12th house. The backstage of your life. Rest, recovery, endings you never quite finished, the load you carry that nobody sees. Saturn reviewing here asks what drains you and whether it has to. Old obligations resurface so you can close them properly instead of letting them trail. Expect less visible drama than the other signs get, and more internal sorting. Sleep, solitude, and completed endings are what this season grades. Gemini, 11th house. Friends, groups, networks, the audience your work reaches. The audit lands on your circles. Which alliances are load-bearing and which are habit. A group role you took on this year may come up for renegotiation, and a friendship that survives a straight conversation this fall is one to keep. Prune like you mean it. Whoever remains in December is your real team. Cancer, this one runs across the top of your chart. 10th house. Career, reputation, the title under your name. A professional structure that took shape this year, a role, a plan, a chain of command, gets re-examined. Progress can feel slower here, and slower is the point. The promotion or pivot that clears this review arrives load-tested. Reopen the terms yourself while the file is on the desk. Leo, 9th house. Study, travel, publishing, and what you believe. A course, a qualification, a manuscript, a move abroad, whatever launched in May gets its assumptions checked. A plan built on borrowed conviction shows its seams this season. A plan built on your own firm's up. Revise the syllabus, redraft the chapter, rebook the trip. The far horizon is still there in December, better mapped. Virgo, 8th house. Shared money and deep ties. Debts, taxes, inheritance, a partner's income, and the trust underneath all of it. This review reads fine print. An arrangement you entered during the first pass may need its real terms said out loud. Restructuring a loan, revising an agreement, asking the awkward question early, all of it goes better under this transit than avoidance does. What is still solvent when Saturn turns is solvent in fact. Libra, Saturn sits directly opposite your sign, in your 7th house. Partnership, marriage, business partners, the person across the table. Commitments made in the first half of the year get weighed for balance. Who carries what, and is the split still fair? Lopsided arrangements surface here, not to end them, but to reset the terms while both of you are looking. A partnership that renegotiates cleanly this fall tends to outlast the decade. Have the conversation. Scorpio, 6th house. Work, workload, health, the systems that run an ordinary day. The schedule you built on the first pass gets another inspection, and so do the habits your body keeps. Where the routine leaks, this season finds it. The fix is rarely dramatic. An earlier night, a boundary on your hours, the checkup you stop postponing. Tune the day now, and everything downstream of it runs smoother into the new year. Sagittarius, 5th house. Creative work, romance, children. what you make because you want to. Saturn reviewing here turns a hobby toward a body of work, and it asks the sharp question: which project deserves finishing? A romance from earlier in the year gets serious or gets clear. Discipline in this house does not kill joy. It is how the joyful thing survives contact with a calendar. Pick one creation and carry it to the finish. Capricorn, the review strikes the base of your chart. 4th house. Home, family, the ground you operate from. A lease, a renovation, a family arrangement, a decision about where you live, something domestic goes back on the table. Saturn is your ruling planet, so you know this move. Slow, unglamorous, permanent. Settle the foundation question properly this time, and it stays settled for years. Home should be able to hold weight. This is how it learns to. Aquarius, 3rd house. Your words. Writing, speaking, siblings, agreements, the daily circuit of messages and errands. Something you said yes to months ago, a project of words, a course, a contract, comes back for a second read. Read twice before you sign in October. Redraft the pitch, tighten the argument, mend the sibling thread if one frayed. What you publish after the second read carries further than what you rushed out before it. Pisces, 2nd house. Money, income, assets, what you own, and what you charge. The income plan you drew up this year meets its stress test. An audit, and audits find money as often as they find leaks. Reprice your work, chase the invoice, cut the subscription stack. If income leans on one fragile source, this season pushes you to add a second. The ledger you close in December is the one the new year builds on. 2 dates, then you are free to go. December 10th, when Saturn stands still at 8 degrees of Aries and turns forward. And mid-March, when it clears the corridor and the season closes. Whatever comes up for review between now and then is not new trouble. It is the draft coming back with notes, and drafts that take their notes get stronger. Find the house in your chart that holds 8 to 15 degrees of Aries. If you do not have your chart, the free tool linked below draws it from your birth details in about a minute, houses included. The review is scheduled in that house either way. Walk in prepared.